I'd like to,
Behavior is
excuse me,
like-
I'd like to call the Budget Review Committee to order. It's May 29th, 2019. It's 7 PM. We're in the Aldermanic Chamber. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Alderman at Large Laurie Wiltshire. Here. Alderman at Large Michael O'Brien is present. Alderman at Large Ben Clemens.
Here.
Alderman Jan Schmidt. Here. Alderman at Large David Tenza. Present. Alderwoman at Large Shoshana Kelly. Here. And our chair, Alderman Dowd.
Present.
Also in attendance, Mr. Chair, are Alderman Karen, Alderman Jettie, and Alderman Clay.
Okay. The first item on the agenda is public comment. Is there anyone that would like to give us public comment?
Hi, how are you tonight? Am I close enough, I hope?
Name and address for the transcriber.
Margot Bell, 15 Breon Drive, Nashua, New Hampshire. I am the Executive Director of the Nashua Senior Activity Center, and we are so proud to be a self-standing organization in Nashua for the last 41 years. Since 2006, we have been fortunate to be housed in a beautiful 23,000 square foot Nashua City building. This allows us the ability to provide quality programs and services to area seniors. I want to thank you all for believing and partnering with the Senior Center over the last 5 years. In 2015, 16, 17, and 18, legislation was put forth to allocate funds for the Senior Activity Center. Each year, of those funds, $5,000 has been put aside in a contingency fund. The remainder is to be used for building improvements for our city building. The legislation has made a powerful impact on our program. In 2018, we were able to do numerous repairs, front door hardware, painting of downstairs function rooms, steam cleaning of kitchen and bathrooms, carpets were steam cleaned, upgraded computer memory, LED lighting, refinishing of wood floor, upgrading our phone system, stripping and waxing function room floors, and those are just to name a few of the things. All of these things have made the Senior Center a more welcoming place for folks that come in to use our facility. I appreciate your support on this legislation. I also would like to introduce the president of our board, because he is here tonight, Barney Barbera, and I don't know if he would like to say a few words.
I just want to thank you for your continued support.
Name and address.
Barney Barbera, 5 Birchridge Trail,
Thank you.
Nashua. I want to thank everybody for their continued support of the Senior Center.
Thank you. Anyone else that would like to provide public comment? Nope. So,
Yes, thank you. Sorry for the interruption, Mr. Chair, but I would like to announce that Alderman Harriet Gathright has joined us at 7:02.
okay. And if there's no objections with the committee, I'd like to take R19-141 out of order so that we can do that before getting into the budget wrap-up. And Alderman O'Brien, R19-141.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before us this evening, R19-141, relative to the transfer of $25,000 from the Department 194 contingency account 70100, general contingency, to the Department 109 civic and community activities, accounting classification 56, outside agencies, for the purpose of providing funds to the National Association for the Elderly. Mr. Chair, I would like to make a motion of final passage.
The motion is to recommend final passage to the full board. Is there any discussion? Alderman Clemens?
Just briefly, want to say that I'm happy to support this legislation. I think it's good. I think I think it's a worthy cause, and happy to support it.
Alderman Karen?
Yes, thank you. Well, Ms. Bell took the fire out of my speech. I just want to say that I appreciate the fact that the board has continued to give us that $25,000. As you know, I've been on that board since 2011, And without this money, they would not be able to maintain the facility as well as they have been able to do it. One of the big things that they did, and this was based on former Alderman David Dean's request, was to put a divider between the dining room and the common area. And this allows them to utilize that common area more often, even though Meals on Wheels are there Monday through Friday. The other important part of this is that we try not to take the whole $25,000 and utilize it. We decided as a board of directors, God bless you, board of directors, that $5,000 would be put away in contingency for emergencies down the road. So, but I also want to say, we want to thank Jay Honeywell from building maintenance, because when Marco calls him, because there's an issue with the doors or lights or things like that, he is well-versed. He comes right down. If he can't fix it, someone else will. And I think that shows how important our senior population is to the city of Nashua, even though they're not an agency within our department. They have worked really hard to provide activities, programming, and a place for people to go during the day. So I appreciate all of you for willing to support this $25,000 again this year. Thank you.
President Wilshire?
Thank you. I think this is short money for the bang we get out of it. I think providing services and everything they do over at the senior center for our older population is wonderful. I think the director and the board president, I know some of their board members as well, they're very involved, very invested in how this goes. So thank you for what you do. Happy to support this.
Any other comments? Seeing none, all in favor of R 19-141, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Okay, this evening, this is the first and possibly the only, we'll see, budget wrap-up for the 2020 fiscal year budget, our 19-123. And we have with us the mayor, the CFO, the treasurer, and Mrs. Kleiner. If you'd like to come up. And let's see, communications, there's none.
There is none? Mhm.
Okay, you want to make a motion to take from the table?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to make the motion to take from the table R 19-123.
Motion on the floor is to take our 19-123 from the floor, from the table, rather. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Our 19-123?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before us this evening is R 19-123, relative to the adoption of the fiscal year 2020 proposed budget for the city of Nashua, general enterprise and special revenue funds. There was a public hearing on May 16th of 2019 at the Nashua High Auditorium. Mr. Chair, I would like to make the motion and recommend final passage.
Motion on the floor is to recommend final passage to the full board of R 19-123, which is the budget. Discussion. Alderman Clement.
Thank you. So I think we've had a pretty good budget process, and you know, we've asked some really good questions and we've gotten some good feedback. I had I had a series of questions that I asked CFO Griffin and Treasurer Fredette this morning. And they sent their.
If I could just politely
Yeah,
interrupt, I want to do
sure.
one thing before we get any further. And that is that based on the letter that was sent to us by the mayor on 24 April 2019, asked to increase his budget request by $51,550 to cover the cost of city grant writer. for the Administrative Services Department, 106. The other half is already being covered by the Board of Education, so I'd like to make a motion to include that in the mayor's budget. Any discussion? All those in, yes, Alderman Tenza.
One question with that, Mr. Chairman. I know that you've told us many times that if the budget increases even by $1, it'll have to be approved. Will this amendment also require that same approval at the full board?
Good question, no.
Okay.
This is the mayor's budget. He's adding it to his budget. It's only if we increase his budget.
Okay.
Any other discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Alderman Clemmons.
Thank you. So we had some great discussions here, and there was some concerns surrounding the police department budget and the fire department budget. And so I had some questions that I asked the CFO and the treasurer today, and they basically said that it would be better to discuss those here. So I'm just gonna, I guess, go into a general discussion. So the police department said that they were underfunded by about $113,000, and that they were going to have trouble with some overtime and things like that. The concern that I had with the fire department was the fact that they needed another fire inspector in the fire marshal's office, as well as a new study for updating a fire service plan throughout the city. And those two items, I think, would roughly cost about $150,000. So my question was the following. If we can go to page in the budget book, let me see where it's at. Page 275, which is the capital improvements. And my question is, if we took if you look in column fiscal year 2020, if we took the $122,500 from the airport, and we took the $225,000 from the Court Street roof replacement, and we reallocated those funds to the police in the amount of $113,000, and the fire department in the amount of $150,000. Put the remainder into the contingency for those two purposes, and bonded the rest of the money. Would we be able? What impact would that have on the budget next year? And so that's my question.
Mr. Mayor, do you want to address that, or CFO Griffin?
Sure, I can address it. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and members of the committee for inviting us in. I did give you an overview of my perspective on the budget at the public hearing, so I won't repeat any of that. So the question is, if we reduced the capital improvement budget by basically $350,000, added it to the operating budget, and bonded those $350,000 that currently are in the capital improvements cash budget, so to speak, what effect would it have? I mean, I don't think that is a wise thing to do for the following reasons. Our budget, there's been a lot of pressure over a long time, and there still is. And if anything, we underfund within this budget as I proposed it, and I realize this, but we're trying to provide services and reach a tax increase of no more than 2.9 or 3%. In this budget, we basically underfund capital items. Capital improvements, contributions towards the building fund for the schools, for the fire department, for city buildings, and SERF, Capital Equipment Reserve Fund, which pays for equipment. And I think we've gone about as far as we can in that regard. Our practice for the last 2-3 years has been when we come up with a surplus at the end of the year, which the portion of the surplus that consists of unexpended revenue, we have principally reallocated that money into these capital accounts to help kind of backfill for the fact that we haven't budgeted that really enough in the operating budget. So we kind of backfill with the money that's left at the end of the year. Now the problem with, and I appreciate Alderman Clemens's intent and wanting to help some of our departments. We have many needs. Is that now we enter next year with a $650,000 capital improvements budget instead of $1 million. And $1 million is low, given the size of our budget. I mean, there's many capital improvements that we should be doing. So that in order now to get us back next year to the $650,000, to the $1 million level from the $650,000 we have this year, we have to raise taxes next year by $350,000 just to get to the level that is proposed here. So in essence, we say that next year, I mean, we're deferring a tax increase now, and it'll hit us next year. I mean, I think if the board or if the city wants to increase the budget, I'm not saying I agree or disagree with any specific proposals at the moment, but bite the bullet, just increase the budget. Don't take it from the capital account and just create problems for us later. Now, that's my opinion, my approach towards this. Obviously, the Board of Aldermen makes its own decisions, and but you asked for my perspective, and if the treasurer or the CFO have a different or wish to offer additional comments, of course they can do that.
Yes, I could offer some comments. As you know, the mayor and I and Mr. Fredette, Ms. Kleiner, and Ms. Evans worked on balancing this very difficult budget. And one of our principles going in was to have $1 million in capital to use on what I would call one-time items. For example, the airport comes in with a project, we fund 5% of that dollar value. Wouldn't recommend bonding that for 5% of a $4 million runway expansion or an apron or whatever they call it out there. In addition, the Court Street roof, as you know, that's 2/5 of the cost of the roof that needs to take place over there. And it's my understanding there may be other costs needed. So that's one-time cost in a capital program for one-time long-lived roof replacement. So those two items, although they look attractive to bond, we also have pressures on the debt service, which you've heard Treasurer Fredette and Mayor Donches speak of. Now, the reason why I just wanted to close the gap on, the reason why it was $872,000 last year is, as you recall, we spent $200,000 on solid waste, a roof to cover the electronics over there. So the sum of that plus the 872 is over $1 million. Why that's important is the general fund subsidizes or pays for things at the growth in the solid waste budget. So from the perspective of trying to cover some costs with cash, as the mayor indicates, and having us monitor and manage to the best extent possible a debt service, this is what I would recommend to happen. And as the mayor says, and that's why I have my kind of big laptop here, I can give you the tolerances. But from a general perspective, every $2.2 million that we add in the budget is 1% on the tax rate, because the budget is $270 million, and it's grown since I first got here. So it used to be 1.8, then 2 million, now 2.2. So every 220,000 is a 1/10 of 1% on the tax rate. So those are kind of the tolerances that we deal with. And we're right up to, right now, with the 51,550 that you could add for the mayor's proposed half of a grant writer, that we're up at 2.97% increase. So that's we're right at the, kind of at the tipping point to get over 3. Thank you.
May I continue?
Alderman Clowns?
So, so this is why I had also asked where we thought we would be with the budget surplus. And I know that you got back to me and said you weren't aware of where we would end up or where we would be with that. But what I was thinking, my line of thinking there is that would there be an opportunity through the escrow process to fund those extra costs, particularly for the police department, to add to their budget for overtime later on in the year once we have a better handle on what that surplus is. The question being, though, that we have to have kind of an idea of where we'll be now to sort of know what we can anticipate in the future. I mean, typically, I don't know what we normally have, but we usually have what, 2 million, almost 2 million in escrows, 1 million?
It's usually between $1 million and $2 million.
So, I mean, that's a lot of budget surplus. So I don't know what, Mr. Mayor, what you have planned there or what your ideas are there, but my idea is that we can help these departments. And let me just go into a little bit of why I'm concerned. First of all, I'm concerned about the police department because they run a very tight ship over there. And if the chief is telling us that they're going to be $113,000 short, I have no doubt about it. And the reason for that is because I've seen us in the past, I've been on the board of aldermen in the past, when we've underfunded the police department, and the next thing you know, they're here and they're asking for money because they're going to overrun their budget. And there's nothing that we have to take care of the problem. So we can either do it now, or we can, have a crisis on our hands later on. I just have a lot of confidence that what the chief is saying, I believe him, and I'm not. It's not a criticism on the part of anybody who crafted this budget, but I just think they know what is needed. The second point that, with regards to the fire department, is that Chief Rhodes mentioned that without a new fire inspector, we are impeding private business from coming to Nashua and opening up shop because we're not able to go out and do the inspections in a timely manner, do the things, get the occupancy permits out there in a timely manner, and that concerns me. And that makes it, if we're making it difficult to do business here, that's not good. That's not good for our bottom line. I mean, we want to create an environment where companies want to come in, they want to move in, that increases our tax base. That's better for everybody. So if we spend a little bit more by adding a person there who's going to help generate more tax revenue for us, then I think that's what we should be doing. So those are my concerns, and I'm wondering if the answer is not to take it from capital improvements, which I can certainly understand why that would be the case, then is there an opportunity later on in the year to fund those two things?
Mr. Mayor?
Well, a few thoughts. It really has the same effect as what I was just describing, but let me get to that in a minute. I mean, obviously, the police department does a great job, and they, have met the challenge of the opioid crisis and all, in spectacular fashion. So they've made a lot of arrests. They say, and I totally, believe or endorse the idea that they've made dealing in opioids or fentanyl or any of these illegal substances, this is not the place to do that. So, now what's happened over the last few years is that the police department has not been able to hire enough officers. So with tight budgets, and this budget does include, as I proposed it, the police department's budget is increased by 2.5%, or 2.25%, excuse me, to 31 million and some hundreds of thousands. The way they have dealt with budget pressure, in part just through necessity or just through reality, is that they are usually down a few officers because they haven't been able to hire them. And the budgets have been tight. Budgets have gone up every year, but they've been tight. And they were never really confronted with the issue of, well, what do we do? Because they could never hire enough people to even spend the money that we gave them, in essence. Now, the police department has decided to change its hiring practices in order to reach full complement. And I just want you to have a perspective and a clear understanding about that. So what they've decided to do is, and I think they've said this publicly, so I don't think I'm revealing any secrets or anything like that. They have decided that from now on they will hire police officers from other police departments in New Hampshire, which they have not previously done, which will enable them then to go to full complement. And it is the decision to alter the hiring practices, put more officers on the payroll that is resulting in this shortfall. Now, since we're dealing with $113,000, if instead of going from 174, as an example, 173 to 179, if they go to 177 and, they go from 174 to 177 instead of 179, the budget will work. It's just that final decision to go to full complement, which they've not been at for a number of years, that is causing this $113,000 difference. Now, when I was an alderman, I wanted them at full complement. So I get where you're coming from. But now I'm the mayor and I'm trying to deliver you a budget that will achieve a 3% tax increase. And we have a $3 million increase in health insurance. So the budget is tight in various respects, this being one of them. It appears across the budget. I mean, the school department didn't get everything they asked, at least as I've proposed it. The fire department kind of did, except for this other position. Secondly, back to the fire department more briefly. I don't agree with the idea that not having this person is slowing down private economic growth, because I hear constantly that Nashua is very easy to deal with, and I've never gotten. I was just meeting with one of the mill-yard property owners today. Oh, Nashua is really good to deal with. I've never heard of any project that has said, "Oh, I can't go forward because we couldn't get a fire inspection." So I think it would be desirable to have that, but I'm not sure that in a year when things are tight, it is totally necessary. The third question having to do with why don't we take it out of escrow? That could be done, but it does have the effect of then to reach that budget level next year, we have to we already built in a next year's tax increase just to stay where we are. So in a way, we just say, well, we're deferring a tax increase till next year, and we're taking, we're going to make it a little less next year, but a little less this year, but then next year it will be higher than it could be because we've made that type of decision. So I'm still saying, the budget should be, at least my perspective, is bite the bullet. if that's the decision that the city makes. And I'm not saying, again, whether I agree or disagree, it depends what you do, but that does have that effect.
Alderman Clemmons?
Well, the bottom line here is that, you know, the police department needs to have that funding. We do need a full complement because we have the chief making decisions like taking officers off of the street, walking the beat downtown to cover other areas and things like that. And it's just not what we should be doing. I mean, we've gone for years under this strangulation, I call it, of the spending cap. And it's not that I want to go and, spend millions of dollars over and things like that. But, there comes a point in time when you can't budget by attrition anymore. And you start cutting into muscle. They say trim the fat, but we've cut into muscle now. Nashua's a growing city. Our population is growing. We need more police officers. As the economy grows, we're going to need another fire inspector. We're going to need somebody to go in and be able to inspect these properties and things like that. So, if we're going to sustain the kind of growth that I think Nashua wants, then we need to be ahead of the curve and be prepared for it when it comes, rather than, deal with it as an after the fact or we need to catch up. So I'm going to make a motion to add $113,000 to the police department budget and $150,000 to the fire department budget.
Alderman Wiltshire?
Do we know if there's any funding left in the police special revenue fund?
John can get the number, but it's in the vicinity of 100,000.
Might be a little less than 100,000.
That's an overtime reserve account.
Thank you.
Yeah, I believe when they came in, they said that was one of the reasons they were concerned, because it was getting so low. So the motion is to increase the police budget by 113,000 and the fire department by
150.
150,000.
And if I can just speak to that, the 50,000 there is for replacing the 1986 study of the, I forget what they call it, the
Fire service?
the fire service study and updating that, and that, according to the chief, is going to cost about $50,000.
And just one item on that particular part of it. I know that the fire chief and the deputy have been working with Director Marchand on looking at potential ways of having that funded by a grant. And if we approve the grant writer, that's the person that'll be doing it. And that would be one way to cover that without having to expend out of our operating budget.
Then I'll reduce my amount for the fire department by 50,000 so it's 113 for the police and 100,000 for the fire department.
Any additional comments on the motion? Alderman Kelly?
I was going to ask this a couple of minutes ago, but let me start by saying I appreciate all the hard work that has been put into this by everyone sitting around, including the mayor and Kim. My question is, I've been sitting here for 2 years now. I've heard the same kind of conversations 2 years in a row. And so to Alderman Clemens' point, a lot of times we hear, I've been level funded. The fire department's been level funded for 14 years. So are there ways that we are consistently looking at, and the school department is completely underfunded and understaffed as well, which is, I think, something we haven't talked about that's really important. So are there ways that we're looking at addressing that? Because I do think the fiscal responsibility, which is very important that we've talked about, and the spending cap has put us in a position where we have a fire department that has had the same level funded budget for 14 years. I mean, our our city has changed drastically in 14 years, and I'm sure the school department and the police department, we've heard over and over again, are in a similar space. So how do we start to address that slowly so that it's not consistently what we hear year after year?
Well,
Mayor?
in this context, of course, level funded means the budget goes up, but the level of service is maintained constant. There are no additional people. And for the last few years, we have, in the face of, I think, significant budget pressure, been able to maintain the quality. In other words, a constant service. The budget has gone up enough to maintain the same level of service, but often not to increase it. In the schools, we did add kindergarten for all 5-year-olds, so in some respects, services have increased, and there are other places where that is the case. I mean, so of course you ask a good question, and the hand we're dealt is a state system that continues to push more and more costs over the years onto cities and towns in various respects. The biggest one, but this is not the only, the biggest one for Nashua and all other cities and towns has been the violation of the commitment and promise by the state of New Hampshire to pay 35% of pension costs, which we've discussed, and which induced us to join the pension system. That has cost the city of Nashua a cumulative total of almost $50 million in cash. With that money, we could make all of these improvements times 10, and we'd be able to lower the tax rate. So all of the improvements that Alderman Clemmons has proposed times 10, and cut the tax rate. So we are faced with the not so wonderful situation of having to decide how much people can afford and how much how much service we can provide, and of course that is a decision about which in the law they say reasonable people can differ, because it's a balance, and one person can say, well, we should balance here, and the next person should say we can balance up here or down here. Now there is possibly, I'm looking over to our state reps over here and over here, there is possibly some light at the end of the tunnel, because the House, thanks to the strong advocacy of all of the people on our delegation, especially those in the room who sit on the Board of Aldermen, in the House side has increased municipal aid considerably, especially for schools. And if that budget survives in the Senate or anything like it, if it's signed by the governor, it will enable us to improve, probably maybe do a combination of easing off on the tax rate a little bit, but also improving services at the same time. And if that happens, of course, that will be a great opportunity to make some of these improvements. But I again want to reiterate that, that at least I, and I think the citizens who understand what's going on, really appreciate the efforts of our legislators. And this is the first break in this cycle in like decades, I mean, the first possibility that we might see something significant. So I appreciate it, but that hasn't been passed yet, and we have Alderman O'Brien as well, Schmidt, Harriet Gathright, and Klee, and not everyone is here, but so there's not an easy answer to that. I mean, that could provide some relief, but in the end, in the answer to Alderwoman Kelly's question, the answer is you either decide to raise taxes more than kind of inflation, or you work to try to maintain quality services within kind of an inflation-type budget and an inflation-type tax increase.
All set?
Yeah.
President Wilshire?
What was the amount did we add money to the fire to add positions, dispatchers?
There was an issue, the way the budget was formulated, where the funding wasn't there originally to continue to fund the additional dispatchers that we gave them last year at the last quarter. It was just the way the thing got, the math. And those were funded by the new ambulance and service that we passed last night, by the way.
Yep.
And that revenue is going to fund the dispatches. So the fire department is just happy to have the dispatchers. And I think that having talked to the chief and deputy chief, that I think for this year, they understand the budget and they're willing to stick with what they've been offered.
Thank you.
Yes, Alderman O'Brien.
Thank you. I would just like to comment, and, you know, in a lot, I agree with Alderman Clemmons, and particularly for my old alma mater, the fire department. I mean, but working for the city for 35 years, 25 of that, Nashua had a spending cap. And for the people that support it, maybe that was a lot of fun. But now Nashua has a hangover from it. And it's a big hangover, and Nashua ain't gonna cut it. It's just not the fire marshal's position that was cut. And, you know, actually it was two. There was also an additional lineman that worked to secure the electronic system of wires and everything else that was through the city. And there was, I think, also a mechanic for a while. So, I mean, for a department of the size of roughly about, you know, a couple hundred people, they took a significant hit. I was a deputy chief. Traditionally, the deputy chief has a technician that is assigned to him to drive. He's sort of like my eyes and ears, because in the command structure, like being the general, my job was to stand in front of the building, to be in the central location so people could come up if something awry happened during the particular fire. My wandering eyes and ears were that technician. That was cut. So you look at all the different things that have happened over the years, and I think this is true with the school department. I think it's true with Public Works. It's true throughout the whole city. Don't let the taxpayers think for 1 second that the spending cap was the panacea. Something fell off the radar. I'm looking at spending right now. What are we doing? $1 million for a turbine to work at, you know, at the Jackson Mills? All these things. I mean, did the turbine break because lack of maintenance, because we had a spending cap and we couldn't spend the money to do it? So I don't know. With this potential hangover, I agree, but I don't know. I think we got to take the small incremental steps to get back to where we were. And this wasn't done under one administration. This started with Mayor Streeter, and it went through other administrations that occurred. And now we have a court case that is pending. We'll see what that's. The cap may come back. Maybe it may not. I hope it doesn't, because we didn't benefit from it, not when we're having a discussion of trying to supplement police and fire department. My God. And we're having a discussion like Alderwoman Kelly to, you know, the schools, which is equally as important as the life safety and the protective services. My God. So what do we get from the spending cap? A headache, a hangover. And I don't know. I really just want to say, caution, the taxpayers can't really afford to make it up in one shot, although I wish they could. But I don't think that they can, so we got to take these incremental steps. So I would support, I would caution to say smaller steps into this, but have a plan to come up to rebuild a city that, unfortunately, we're the ones who were taking it apart, our predecessors. So keep that in mind. Thank you, Mr.
Alderman Cleed, I think I skipped you.
Oh, that's okay, that's okay. I'm not on the committee, so I appreciate you taking my question. And I guess this is kind of for the mayor and anybody out there. If the state does come through with those funds, how would that work? Because obviously we'll have already passed the budget and started on our merry way. If we did get all or part of what is kind of, I won't even say numbers, that is being, how would we deal with that? You mentioned that, well, then we could do this, we could do that. Will we have to come back in and rebudget, or how would something like that work?
Well, of course, it depends when we get the money. And I don't know when, under the House proposal, the money would actually come in, but often it doesn't actually come in till the next fiscal year. So if it didn't come in till the next fiscal year, we're really talking about how we would deal with next year's, that would be FY '21 budget. If it did come in during this fiscal year, I think it would add to surplus, and I think there are some service improvements that we could make during the year at that time. For example, the two that Alderman Clemmons has mentioned. Hiring additional teachers or something might be more difficult because in the middle of the year, it's very difficult. Teachers are all committed for a year, so there's certain things that could be done. Maybe we could make some one-time if we got money this year, which I think we're talking a very unlikely scenario, but if we did, maybe we make some service improvements, maybe we do some one-time capital improvements, maybe save some money for next year, different things. I mean, you could do a combination of things, but I think we're talking about, even if we get money next year, that would be, in next fiscal year, that would be fantastic with a capital F. So the idea that we might get money this year, might be just too much to hope for. I don't know what you think.
Follow up, Alderman Clean.
I may be wrong, but I think at least some would be coming this year, but I won't put anybody's hopes up. But I do have a follow-up question on that. If the lawsuit went the wrong way and the spending cap came in and this money came forward, how would that affect us being able to use that money?
Well, you certainly could use it with 10 votes. There was always the possibility of exceeding the spending cap with a 10-vote majority.
Okay, so the alderman would take a
That
10.
it was called, there was a very elaborate way, kind of where it was done, you would vote to exempt certain debt from the calculation, that kind of thing. So that's why the court on its own volition invalidated the cap, because there was no straightforward override mechanism. But there were, if you did the right thing, if you exempted the right part of the budget with 10 votes, you could, in essence, not exceed really the spending cap, but exempt certain parts of the budget from it for that year.
And then you'd be able to spend with the money. Thank you.
Alderman Clemmons?
Thank you. So I just want to go back to some math here. So, and please correct me if I'm wrong. So, as I understand it, with the 50,000 that we did approve earlier in the meeting, we're at a 2.97% increase. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So, and you said 225,000 added would add a 0.1% to that figure.
John Griffin, CFO, that's correct.
Okay, so if my math is correct, then if we were to pass my amendments here, we'd be looking at 3.07% of a tax increase next year. The benefit being that we get to hire a new position in the fire department, which we've obviously been underfunded for years. And we can ensure that the police department can become at full complement, which I think we can all agree on is a goal that we should be going for. And so I agree with Alderman at Large O'Brien in that we should be taking small steps. And I think this is a small step that the board can take to kind of move beyond the status quo of we're just going to provide people with the same services. And so the way I look at it is we're going to provide people the same services and increase your taxes 2.97%. Or we could give them an extra position in the Fire department, we could give them a full complement. Police department for 3.07% and say, now you're paying more in taxes, yes, but you're visibly getting something out of it as opposed to just the same stuff. So I think for 0.1% on people's taxes, I think this is a worthwhile cause.
Mayor?
Now, I think Alderman Clemens' math is correct. I would only add that there are some service improvements in the budget. For example, there are 4 ELL teachers that didn't exist before in the contingency account.
Agreed.
And we are adding an energy manager, which I think can improve our energy picture, and we have a grant writer. So there are some improvements. That's my only comment on it.
Agreed.
Alderman O'Brien, did you?
Thank you. To consider more what we're doing here, on the 2 departments, we have pending before us, or I think we're currently in negotiations with some of our unions, and I see that was tabled, R-18102, which is, we're in negotiations with the Uniformed Police Officers Local 645, and I think we're currently in negotiations with the Firefighters Association Local 789. Any of these adjustments to the budgets, could that affect any potential negotiations that are, currently pending right now?
Mayor, Mr. Griffin?
John Griffin, CFO. As you know, we understand that we have the supervisors at the police department coming up, and we have the firefighters, and there might be a few others. But what we do is in the development of the budget, we put what the expectation is for increases. And it's been past practice to take those values out of the budgets and move them to contingency for negotiation. Now, to the extent that the negotiations lead to greater than what's budgeted, then obviously we have to figure out how to true that up. But the good news is the police department and the fire department and others, they basically give us what they truly believe is a good number for negotiations. It wasn't the finance department or the accounting department. It's them telling us what they think the number is.
Yeah, and, thank you, Mr. Griffin. And through the chair, if I may, I do have a technical question, if I may, through the chair to Alderman Clemens. You mentioned the fire department for that position of, you designated $100,000 for that particular position. And looking at it, I think that that position is covered somewhere within the lieutenant's salary, which is $86,442. Do you want to go for the 100,000, or do you want to amend it to that particular salary range?
Do we know that yeah,
Mr. Griffin?
Whenever, John Griffin, CFO, whenever you add an individual employee, you need to account for the salary, the FICA, the MEDI, pension,
That's what I mean.
benefits. So it's the 100,000. I watched that meeting. I'm not sure if the chief indicated that 100,000 would cover an entire employee, but generally speaking, it would be 30 to 35 to 40% of salary to cover those values. I think the fire department number is a little over 30% of salary to cover the pension, the employee portion of the pension. So they could probably make it work at 100, but I'm not sure. They could make it work, I think, without the 100. But I think if they got the 100, they probably,
Right.
you want to complete the exercise soon. They've got a multi-million-dollar budget. I think that could work. I wouldn't try to calculate with specificity all those numbers at this point.
If I may, it's, thank you. It's, regardless, it's a clerk's question. It's basically, if the motion passes, to make sure that it's adequate, is what I'm saying, So I was looking at the salary and it was less. I understand the cost But is it enough? And that's what the question is.
Alderman Tenza?
May I make a comment on another topic, or would you like to? Okay.
Is it related to there's a motion?
It is related to the motion. So as far as Alderman Clemmons, I mean, I appreciate the fact that we want to get every department up to full complement. As I look at the police department budget, they are adding 5 full-time patrol officers in this budget. The patrol officers that they're going to be able to add because of the changes that they're making are have already been through the academy, are going to be able to hit the streets. We're not going to have to pay for the training. They're not going to be, in the office for 3 or 4 months before they go to the academy. So for this year at least, I'm feel comfortable and I'm willing to go forward with the amount as set, the amount of full-time positions, without allocating more money to the police department to see how it goes. Now, if next year the new chief comes back and says we really need that, or has a specific program in mind that will benefit the city, as far as community policing, then I'd consider, increasing that, or potentially we don't have to even increase it if it's we're able to allocate it in the budget. So I wouldn't be at this point willing to support that motion or that amendment. And then as far as the fire department, I'd like to see a little bit more specific numbers about what exactly we would need to do. And I'd like to see if there are other ways that we could raise revenues in order to help fund that position, whether it's increasing inspection fees for businesses, something like that.
Further discussion, Alderman Clemmons?
With all due respect to Alderman Tenza, the point of at least in regards to the fire department, the point of adding the position is to make it easier for businesses to come into the city and do business. Raising fees is not conducive to that. So that's something I fundamentally disagree with. I think and I just wanted to make that point.
Okay, a couple things before we go too far. One thing for everybody watching at home. The biggest increase in our budget this year was the $3 million in insurance, which we have little or no control over. And I know that Mrs. Kleiner is working on reducing that for next year. And I've also asked her to have that company come in and give us an overview. It'll be after the budget, but as to why the insurance costs are as high as they are. So that being said, that's a $3 million hit, which is causing the constraint in other areas. The other thing is that in talking to a number of people in the city of Nashua, with all that's gone on with the assessing and the increases, putting a tax increase over 3% to them is I think asking too much. So in that regard, I would be looking for a compromise. Something in the order of in the police department, maybe giving them $50,000, and I haven't made a motion yet, but or hiring, not both, but hiring the fire marshal halfway through the year, cutting that amount in half, which again would be $50,000. I think we could live with $50,000 in either one, but not both. So we can have more discussion, but I may be making a motion to amend. Alderman Clemmons?
Thank you. I think this goes back to the mayor's original point, which was that, regardless of when we add something to the budget, it's going to increase the budget next year. So, I appreciate what you're saying. My personal opinion is that the 0.07% over 3% is not too much to ask our citizens when, you put into perspective that the things that we are asking them to increase are things that go directly to their safety, the safety of the city, and in addition to that, a position that will not only increase safety, but also help expand our tax base in a better, more efficient way. So again, I go back to, you know, the reason I made the motion was I agreed with what the mayor had said, which is that, you know, regardless of when we add these positions, we're gonna have to raise the money to do it, and we're gonna have to raise taxes to do it. And, you know, right now, the economy is strong right now. And it's never popular to raise taxes, I understand that. But regardless of whether or not we add these two, whether or not we say yes to this motion or not, we're raising taxes. So, you know, if we pass the mayor's budget as is, we're raising taxes. We're just raising it 0.1% less than what I'm proposing right now.
Just one other bit, Mr. Griffin, you and I talked about the Hillsborough County hasn't passed their budget, and how would that impact the tax rate?
John Griffin, CFO, Treasurer Fredette is our expert, I would say, locally on taxes, but he would argue that there's a lot of moving parts on revenue, county tax, overlay, things of that nature. The only thing that's when we file our MS files to the state is this budget number and the state revenue that we get. They plug those numbers in, but Mr. Fredette is makes me aware that this is not the final set of numbers. What we tried to do is give you just under 3. This is what the operating budget would be. I've got 3% in here for the county tax. I don't know if it's 3 or 4 or 5, but I've seen it higher than 3. Very rarely have I seen it lower than 3. But those are variables, and we're trying to isolate on the variables we know. And one of the things we do know is if we pass this budget, that's locked in on the MS forms. Thank you.
Any other discussion? I talked to all the department heads, and of course, if we could give more money to the school department, if we could give more money to the fire department, police department, you know, that would be great. If not a lot, but for the reasons that have all been brought up. However, I still feel very concerned about passing any kind of a tax rate that's over 3%. It seems like an arbitrary goal, but it's a perception thing as well as anything else. So in that regard, I'm going to make an amendment to Alderman Clemens' motion to allocate an additional $50,000 to the police department and no additional funds to the fire department.
Can we, with all due respect, can we just vote on my motion, and then if it fails?
I amended your motion.
Is that in order?
Motion to be
Okay.
amended.
So you can amend my motion.
Yes.
We have to vote on it.
You have
Well,
to vote on
with
it.
all due respect, I wish you would withdraw that motion and just, we could just have a straightforward vote, but.
If the amendment fails, then your motion will be back on the floor.
Parliamentary inquiry?
Sure.
I think with the president, I think you could withdraw if you so wish. Let his motion stand, but if you can make a subsequent motion on your own after that, after you make his, if his motion should fail,
If his motion passes,
then it's, yeah.
then I'd do just a new motion to cut it. But either way, same thing. If the amendment passes, then that's what people want to do. If they don't, then Alderman Wilshire.
I'm not going to support Alderman Clement's motion, only because with the revaluation this year, and a lot of people saw an increase in their tax bill, and it's just, it's not a good year to go over 3%, and even 3% for some people is going to be a stretch. And you know, I support the police and fire and schools, I always have. However, you know, the fire department has some, you know, new dispatchers, and the police, if they need the money, will have to come to us. It's like snow. You have so much of it, you got to keep taking care of it, right? Crime and snow, they're kind of the same for budgeting, for budgeting anyway. For those reasons, I can't. I think the fire department was okay with us not adding that other position this year, maybe next year, because they got dispatchers. And the police department, we have to fund it. I mean, if they have to come back to us, they'll have to come back to us. There's not much we can do with that. So for that reason, I'm going to support Alderman Dowd's motion.
Alderman O'Brien?
Thank you, and to echo President, I do say that because in the previous motion that was made for the grant writer, that could be extra money for, that we're talking about for the fire department. And what the intention was for the grant, if we think about what is the grant that we want to see on coming up over the horizon, and that is another study of the fire department, where additional personnel, that report may come back. We may have to shutter the doors after we read that report and find out, oh, we're that far behind, you know, and that's what that report might give us a legitimate. So I'm okay with pending off for a year, although I show some disdain because I too support the police and fire and of course the education and public works. I support the whole city, but the thing is I'm willing to wait till we get this report and then we could look in a better light with the report. And the shame was the Hayes study that came out years ago was ignored by this board under the auspices of part of it, the spending cap. I hope that never happens again. Another thing that contributed to the hangover. So I'm kind of hoping that when this report comes in, I think that might be a more valuable time to look at every position and find out what we're going to do here.
But just one thing before we go too far. When I said I talked to all the department heads, I talked to all the department heads. And Director Marchand would like additional code inspectors and other personnel. But she was very, very happy to get the master plan funding so that we can get a better plan that hasn't been updated for 20 years and find out where we're going before we go too far. BPW pushed off 2 major pieces of equipment in the SURF fund till next year. And hopefully we can't push them any further. And BPW has a number of funding issues that are going to be downstream, but you know, even today they could increase. So it's not just, you know, police, fire, and schools. The budget has been tight for the reasons mentioned for all departments. So, is there any other discussion on the amendment? Alderman Schmidt.
I have to say that I can't support anything higher than what we've got in the budget right now. And I know it's really important to make sure that everything is covered. And I think it was fairly done. I really do. And I know there's things that we could do, but between the recession and the cap that we had to live with and the downshifting from the state, we just can't do it this time. We're trying very hard to make sure that the city is treated more fairly by the state, but until then, I think we need to stick with this budget.
Alderman Kelly.
I had a question for clarification. We've just been talking about it for so long. Your 50,000 amended, what is that going to for the police?
The $50,000 for the police would be to the bottom line.
Just the bottom line?
To the
You're
police.
not specifically looking at one of the line items that they talked about?
No.
Okay.
Alderman Clee.
I just have a couple of, I think, comments. When I look at their overtime that they put in their budget and what the mayor has put in his budget, it's always so much less than what the reality of it is. But the reality is that they were shorted staff before. They are getting a larger staff to partial complement and so on. But one of the things about doing overtime is that number of hours, we're not paying benefits. We're not paying all of those other things of healthcare costs and so on. It's already with that same body. So I'm a little confused as to how much they really need and if it's where they've been doing it through attrition and so on. I'm just curious about that.
In talking to the soon-to-be new chief, Kerrigan, they in the past have managed their budget by not being fully funded and therefore not having officers that they had to pay because they couldn't hire them. That's the reason the police commissioners changed the way their hiring practices. And when they bring an officer in from another department, they give them the vacation that they'd been used to and the benefits and the funding level that they were at. And before, all the new officers came in at the bottom. And that may be variations of what I just said, but basically, they're hiring experienced police officers, which, by the way, do not just go out on the street. They have to spend those few months learning how Nashua does things. I was assured of that. And so if we do give them the 50,000, it helps them to manage the other 63,000 via that, people coming and going. And it's a little easier to do than the 113,000, in which case they wouldn't be fully staffed. And all of you get the reports every single day on arrests. I mean, it's not like these guys aren't doing anything. And they're risking, like the firemen, risking their lives every day. What I propose, the 50K, is a compromise. If the budget committee and the full board is willing to keep it just where it is at the mayor's budget, that's fine. But I do not want to go over 3%. Any other discussion? Alderman Cleen?
Just kind of a follow-up on that. With the extra 5 officers that they're going to do in a different way and so on, do we know how close to full does that give them?
In talking to Chief Lavoie and now acting chief, or soon-to-be chief,
Right.
Carrion, they're fully intending to hire full complement.
And if that's the case, then with this overtime, because the overtime still increased significantly from what they requested the last time and half of what they actually used.
The overtime is a variable. And when things happen, as an example, that episode in Manchester, where they had almost their entire force there 24 hours, a lot of that was overtime. Our people that went up to help the Manchester team, City of Nashua had to pay for our guys. Just like if the Manchester police came down here to help us, they'd be paying for them. Things like that are unknown unknowns. If things are very well, then it's easier to manage their overtime budget. But at the beginning of the budget season, when they addressed the mayor, they said that, hey, based on where our budget is, we can't fund the stroll. It's $18,000 for overtime. But the mayor put that in another part of the budget, and they're covered for that. But they have overtime events all the time. For instance, they have a set-aside money for major crimes. If there's a major crime, murder, or, I don't know, when you speculate, they have the monies to cover that. But it's other overtime events, major fire, whatever that they don't know. and they feel that it's gonna be very difficult to manage with the funding level they have, because they sort of planned in their budget to be as close as possible. So, again, what I propose is a compromise. Any other discussion? All right, the motion on the floor is to amend to Alderman Clement's motion to make a $50,000 increase in the bottom line of the police budget and no additional funding to any other department. If there's no further discussion, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed?
No.
Division? Those that vote in favor, raise your hand. 3, those opposed? All right, fails. So now the motion on the floor is to add $113,000 to the police department and $100,000 to the fire department, which would push us way over the 3%. Any further discussion on that motion? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Nay. That fails. We're back to the original budget. Alderman Clements?
So I did a little math here in my head and been on the board of aldermen on and off since 2008. I voted for the budget in 2008, 2009, and 2017. I voted against it in 2010, 2011, and 2016. Every single time I voted against it because we haven't funded the budget enough. 2017 was a little different. I voted for it because of the lawsuit that we were under at the time. However, had I had my druthers, I would have voted against that too, because it cut some staff over in the school department in the way of the custodians. In fact, out of the budgets that I voted against, the custodians has often been the reason why I voted against them, because we've continually beaten them down, that union. So I guess I'll be 4 for 3 now, because I'm going to vote no on this budget because I don't think it does enough. And I don't think the 3.07% was too much to ask. And so for those reasons, while I appreciate what the mayor has done, and I think there are very good things in this budget, I don't feel it goes far enough, because I don't think it takes care of the business community, and I don't think it takes care of the police department very well.
Other discussion? Alderman Kelly.
Hi, me again, school department girl. I appreciate all the discussion that's happened, and I think that we all kind of understand where we are with the budget. I'm going to continue to advocate for the school department. I know that we struggle in this chamber because we can't tell them specifically what they can spend the money on, but I would like to move to give them $65,000, which would cover 2 paras. That's my suggestion, and the 1 social worker that they had to take out of the budget.
Is that a motion?
That is a motion, yes.
So the motion on the floor is to increase the school department budget bottom line by $65,000. Recall, we can talk to it, but we can't mandate what they do with that money.
Right, and if I could talk to it for a moment.
Sure.
I think all of the departments are deserving of more money. I know there's a lot of things going on, but for the school specifically, they have to hire them pretty quickly to be ready for the school year. And I know in the last 2 years, we've brought on full-day kindergarten, and they've still been struggling very much so with not having enough paras in the classroom. So I think to the conversation that's happened, the bang for the buck for this is definitely worth it. And I've seen myself and heard from constituents, a lot of people moving out of district because of the school departments and not having the staffing, or not feeling like they were where they wanted to be. So I think this will go a little way in helping retain people And if I could remind people that one of the big things that the school department talked about, and we got some numbers on, is that we're spending $6 million in out-of-district placement. So I think as we start to chip away at these things, not that necessarily two paras is going to make the difference in that, but I think we have to start thinking about what those programs look like, what does our staffing look like, so that we can start to pull that back in.
So the motion is to add $65,000 to the bottom line of the school department budget. Any further discussion? Alderman Wiltshire.
I appreciate that motion. However, hiring paras right now, I mean, the unemployment rate is so low. We're having difficulty hiring people at an entry level kind of position. So even if we funded it, I'm not sure they could find people to do it. I appreciate the motion, though, I do.
Any other discussion? Alderman Tenza?
Thank you. So I would support the motion, and I would wonder if Alderwoman Kelly would agree to, I'll allow her to make this amendment to her motion if she'd like to, agree to add that to the contingency fund for the ESL teachers that's already been included in the budget. So that that money goes specifically for those positions.
Alderman Kelly?
I think that's a fair point. Is that something we can do? I know that we set up the contingency specifically. Is that something we could add?
CFO Griffin?
John Griffin, CFO, we aptly named that particular account school-related items. So you could add, that was specifically for ELL teachers, but you could add the 65 to that account, not the school bottom line, but to that contingency amount, changing it from 200,000 to 265.
Can I
Alderman
ask one
Kelly?
more question? Yeah. So that is the line that represents the line item that the school board put together. Am I remiss in missing benefits for them? I know that most of them are part-time.
Well, that 200,000, my understanding was the 50,000 each ELL teacher, not including benefits.
Okay.
So it didn't true up the benefits.
So if I follow on, they're picking up the benefits for that is what's happening.
Just further dialogue on that. We attribute the benefits to the school district. We would have to offer full-time ELL teachers benefits. If they take it, it's coming out of the city self-insurance fund. They never, when they make hiring decisions, they don't take into account the benefits, but they get, with specificity, when we know who the person is and what they're taking, we charge the school department that amount.
So just how that contingency works is when they have someone that they're ready to hire, they will come to us and ask us to transfer the money from contingency for the full cost of that position to their account. Then they'll hire the person. Alderman Kelly.
So that would mean if they have trouble hiring either the paras or the ELL, that money would go back to the budget line at the end of the year, correct? Because
That
it
would
wouldn't
sta-
be spent.
That money would stay in contingency and not be spent.
Correct. Okay. That makes me feel better. So I'm happy to make that motion to put it in with the contingency.
Okay, by the way, does the clerk have that motion to?
Yeah, and my question through the chair to CFO Griffin, what line item would that motion be under?
CFO Griffin, it would be page 271, 70112, and I stand corrected. It's contingency-education priorities.
Contingency education priorities.
So you'd add, your motion would be to add 65,000 to that number.
All set?
Mm-hmm.
Alderman Clemmons?
Thank you. I'll support this motion to amend the budget. Doesn't change my position on the overall budget, however, but I'd rather see a budget with this in it than a budget without it. So I will support adding this to the budget.
Any other discussion on the motion? Alderman Jettie.
As you well know, I'm not on the committee, so I don't have a vote, but I would like to, I appreciate the sentiment behind the motion. However, I would like to point out that the budget that was submitted to us by the school department is a budget that they voted on. And, they didn't fight for this increase. What they submitted to us was something I understand that they worked out with the mayor to allow for the ELL teachers to be put in contingency. And when they appeared before us, this was the budget that they had agreed upon, that the school board had voted on. And I feel, I'm not, 100. I'm not saying that I would vote against it if it gets to the full board level, but I'm wondering if we're not substituting our judgment for the school board's judgment. And I just wanted to make that remark.
So the mayoral budget adjustment to their budget was $729,000. So they had put in a budget $729,000 more than they are currently getting. And did they agree with it? Well, it all depends on how you define agree, I guess. But, I mean, there are other things that they wanted to do that they can't do. And we just can't possibly afford that additional amount of money, so. Alderman Kelly.
Thank you. If I could talk quickly to how I arrived at that. After the school board meeting, I asked for a number of different documents based on how they made their decision. And we got some information on what the out of district placement were, as well as what they cut from the budget. And in that list, there was kind of a reasoning beside each thing, like, oh, we're deferring it, or we don't have enough time to hire this teacher. But those two items had nothing. And I feel very strongly that the pairs are needed. And I know I specifically asked the board president and Dr. Mosley, if it's pie in the sky, what would you feel? And I believe that her response was, I would like 12 paras and 12 paras and ELLs. So if I can give her two, I'd really like to do that.
For much as I'm concerned about increasing the budget, I can tell you I have a lot of people I know in the school department, and also liaison to the Board of Ed and Budget as is Alderman Schmitz, my backup. They have always been short paras. And when they have teachers out, sometimes the paras, if they're qualified, have to take over teaching the class, then they're short more paras. And a lot of the paras that they hire are mandated by federal law. So those paras are usually one-on-one, I'm sure Mrs. Kleiner knows as well, are one-on-one with students, and they can only focus on that one student. So it's good that it's in contingency for the reasons that President Wiltshire said. It could be tough to hire them. They're having trouble hiring, but trust me, they could use as many paras as they could get. Alderman Clemens?
Yeah, I just want to follow up and say, in response to one of the remarks that was made, there used to be a time when the school board would present a budget that they felt was correct, and they would present that, and the mayor would in most cases cut it, and then the Board of Aldermen would fight over it, and that would be that, and they'd get a bottom line, and then they'd go and rewrite it based on what that bottom line was. The Mayor Lozo took a different approach to that, where she wanted them to craft a budget that was going to come in that she thought was fair and that the city could anticipate what the costs and things like that were gonna be. And since that time, that's sort of been the approach, both by her and by the current mayor, and I kind of agree with it because we know what we're putting in and they know what constraints are there. So they submit a budget that's 700,000 above, and then the mayor comes back and says, okay, we can't do this realistically. Where are your priorities? How can we negotiate a better budget? So it's not necessarily that we know better than them. It's that we can't afford to do all the things that are necessary to give children a quality education in this city. So we have to make do with what we have. And, you know, I was here at the meeting. I heard what Dr. Mosley said, and Alderwoman Kelly is 100% correct when she says that that is what they ask for. So, like the police department asked for more money here at this committee, and like the fire department did as well, we've done our homework. You know, I've done my homework. It's clear that Alderwoman Kelly has done her homework. We've done the work as a committee. And so, you know, these aren't just things that we want to have or nice things. These are things that are coming from those departments.
Alderman Jettie?
I rechecked the number, and I was wrong. You were right. They asked for 700 or so thousand more. And so I withdraw my objection.
Did the mayor want to address anything relative to the school board budget, or?
I think what happened is, yes, they submitted the original, then I spoke with them, and similar to what Alderman Clemmons said, and I said, well, I think we can afford X. And then they said, okay, we'll submit a budget for X, and they came in with the 2.25, but because they were pretty persuasive in terms of the need for these additional teachers, I, in the budget, include the 2.5, but also because they had sort of specially pled for the ELL teachers, I put that in contingency. I think that's kind of I think that's the events.
Alderman O'Brien.
Thank you. Through the chair to CFO Griffin. This pending motion of 65,000 will bring us up to what now?
CFO Griffin, 3%.
Well, zero even, okay.
Okay, any other discussion? So the motion on the floor is to add 65,000 to the bottom line of the school board budget in contingency to be allocated upon them telling us that they had someone they would hire for those positions. Correct. Any additional comments, discussion? Okay, so the amendment is to add 65 to the bottom line school board budget under contingency. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Motion carries. So, the motion on the floor now is to, unless there's any additional changes, to pass the full budget with the addition that was just added. And can you give us an update on, you said 3% and the dollar amount?
Certainly, John Griffin, CFO, on the budget as amended, the new appropriation amount would be $270,384,074.
Oh, need to get rid of that $74.
Feels weird.
Okay, so the motion on the floor is to recommend final passage to the budget for FY 2020 in the amount of $270,384,074. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I think we ought to take it by roll call.
Okay. Chair ready?
Yes.
Okay. Alderman at large, Laurie Wilshire.
No.
Alderman at large, Michael O'Brien votes yes. Alderman at large, Ben Clemens.
No.
Alderman Jan Schmidt.
Yes.
Alderman at large, Dave Tenza.
Yes.
Alderman at large, Shoshana Kelly. Our chair, Richard Dowd.
Yes.
I have 5 yeas, 2 nays.
So the motion passes, and we will send a recommendation on to the full board for a budget of $270,384,074. All right. New business?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yep.
Let me catch up. There is one bill, R 18102, which is
eh.
tabled in committee.
Yes. For
Okay,
you, new business was none.
done.
R 18102 is still on the table. General discussion. Alderman Clemens.
I just want to thank everybody for their time this evening coming here. I know that the Bruins are on, and I don't want to delay this any longer.
Brilliant.
But I do appreciate everybody's time, and I think, even though I'm not supporting the budget, I think it is a relatively good budget. It's only a few $100,000 off from what I wanted, but can't have everything.
Must be a game on until all of a sudden the people disappeared.
I know, right?
Alderman Kelly?
I just wanted to point out that it's also opening night for the Knights, and I would be there if I wasn't here.
Me too. Trust me.
Go Knights.
Yeah, they're always good entertainment.
Yeah.
Alderman Wilshire.
So, like I said earlier about the budget, I didn't want to go to 3%, and that's the only reason. I want police and fire in there, I want school in there, but after the revaluation this year and people's tax bills, I think 3% is more than I want to do. In most part, because of everything else that's going on. I mean, we're doing a performing arts center, and we've got, the revals, and we've got all this other stuff. To add more to people's plates financially, it just didn't make sense to me right now.
Any other discussion? Yeah, I was thinking amending it and cutting 5,000 from that so it'd stay under 3%, but I figured, but at the full board level,
We could do that.
you could do that.
I might have supported that.
Public comment? No one here. Remarks by the Alderman? I think we've covered all that.
Go Bruins.
Go Bruins. Go Knights.
I don't know if anyone wants to know the score, but it's, the better team is ahead.
How do we know?
Intuitive.
Intuitive.
Alderman O'Brien, do I have a motion?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Motion to adjourn.
Motion is to adjourn. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. We're adjourned at 8:38.